Picture yourself waking up on a June morning. Not just any morning, the kind you'd expect to feel like honey poured over your skin, warm light spilling across the wooden floorboards, the smell of blooming jasmine drifting lazily in through an open window. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barking, a rooster crowing. You open your eyes expecting that warmth, but instead, your breath escapes in a thin white cloud. You blink. There's frost clinging to the inside of the glass, delicate, feathered patterns that glitter in the pale light. Your fingertips leave streaks of clarity when you press them against the cold. The chill isn't just in the air, it's in your bones. You pull the blanket tighter. Your bare feet touch the floor and recoil instantly from the icy wood. The sound of it, that sharp sound of frozen boards, echoes in your quiet room. Something's wrong. You move to the shutters, heart thumping faster than you'd like to admit. When they creak open, the world beyond is not what it should be. It is silent. Too silent. No bees, no morning birdsong. Even the air itself feels muffled, as though the world is holding its breath. And then you see them. Tiny white flakes drifting down from a dull gray sky. They catch on the window frame, melting slowly. No, not melting, staying. Snow. Snow in the middle of summer. You stand there a long moment, unable to make sense of it, until a sudden gust sends the flakes swirling in little spirals. Down the lane, you hear the crunch of boots on snow. Your neighbor, old Thomas, is standing in the street with a wool cap pulled low over his brow, staring upward at the sky. Another figure appears, Mary, the baker's wife, still wearing her apron, flour on her hands. She looks confused, frightened. Soon more villagers gather, wrapped in whatever blankets and coats they could grab. Murmurs ripple through the group. Some are pointing upward. Others simply look down at their shoes, shaking their heads. No one knows what to say. And then someone, you can't tell who, mutters the question that's been forming in your own mind. What could cause the entire world to lose its summer? You swallow hard. Because deep down, some part of you knows this isn't going to pass in a day or two. And you'd be right. This isn't a tale from science fiction. This is history. It happened. The year was 1816, and the world was about to freeze in the strangest way imaginable. It began a year earlier, far away from the frosted windows of Europe and the snow-struck fields of America. The world's deadliest summer was being set in motion, quietly at first, on the other side of the globe. In the Dutch East Indies, what we now call Indonesia, there stood a mountain the locals both feared and revered, Mount Tambora. To the Bajau sailors who navigated the warm waters around Sumbawa, it was a familiar landmark, a great looming shadow above the island, its peak often crowned with thin, wispy clouds. Generations had passed down stories about the mountain. Some said it was the dwelling of powerful spirits. Others spoke of its past fury, a long-ago eruption whose details had blurred into legend. But for most, Tambora was simply there, a quiet giant that marked the horizon. Then, the mountain began to speak. In early 1815, the people of Sumbawa noticed subtle changes. At first, it was just the occasional tremor, so faint that the wooden houses only shivered for a moment. Then came the sounds, a low growl that rolled through the ground like thunder that refused to end. At night, the villagers heard sharp cracks echoing through the jungle, as though the earth itself was splintering beneath their feet. By March, clouds of smoke began to drift from the summit. Some swore they could smell sulfur on the breeze. The local Dutch colonial officers recorded the events in careful, nervous handwriting, sending notes to Batavia, present-day Jakarta, warning that Tambora was in an unsettled state. And then April came. On April 5th, the mountain let out a roar so loud it startled sailors hundreds of miles away. Ships in the port of Makassar reported hearing what they thought were distant cannons. No one knew it yet, but this was just the first breath before the scream. For the next 5 days, Tambora was restless. Villagers fled the slopes, carrying bundles of rice, pots, and children in their arms. Livestock were left behind, wandering nervously as the sky over Sumbawa turned a darker shade of gray each day. At dusk on April 10th, the world split open. A column of fire erupted from the mountain's peak, blasting straight into the heavens. Lightning crackled inside the ash cloud, bolts of blue-white tearing through the darkness like the sky itself was at war. Eyewitnesses on the nearby island of Lombok reported seeing the plume rise over 40 kilometers into the air, so high it pierced the stratosphere. The ground shook with such force that stone walls collapsed. People fell to their knees, clutching their heads as if to keep their skulls from rattling apart. Then came the darkness. Not night, something deeper. A choking, suffocating black that swallowed all light. Even the brightest lanterns glowed only as faint orbs in the ash-choked air. For 3 days, the sun vanished over Sumbawa. Fine ash rained down endlessly, piling knee-deep in some places. Roofs caved in under the weight. Villages disappeared entirely. The sound of the explosion traveled more than 2,000 miles. British officers stationed on Sumatra thought they were hearing the guns of a distant naval battle. In the Indian Ocean, sailors aboard the Benares wrote in their logs that the booming was so constant, so deep, that the sea itself seemed to tremble. When the eruption was finally over, the top 1/3 of Mount Tambora was gone, blown away in an instant. Over 10,000 people on Sumbawa died within hours, buried in boiling ash flows or burned alive by pyroclastic surges that raced down the mountain faster than a horse could run. But these deaths, horrific as they were, would not be the only ones Tambora claimed. The volcano had loosed something far deadlier than fire, something invisible. High above the clouds, millions of tons of ash, rock, and sulfur dioxide had been hurled into the upper atmosphere, into a realm where rain could not wash them away. There, they would linger, circling the earth, spreading a thin veil across the sky, and quietly preparing to turn the world cold. In the weeks after April 1815, life on Sumbawa was nothing short of ruin. Ash blanketed the land so thickly it was like walking across the surface of the moon. Fields were gone, rivers clogged, and the survivors faced a new enemy: hunger. But far from the island, the rest of the world still carried on, blissfully unaware that something monumental had just happened. Something that would touch every human being on Earth. When Mount Tambora exploded, it didn't just send ash into the air. It sent it beyond the air we live and breathe. Most volcanic ash is heavy enough to settle out of the lower atmosphere within weeks. Rain pulls it down, cleaning the skies. But Tambora's eruption was so violent that much of its debris shot 25 miles high into the stratosphere, a place far above the clouds. Here, the air is so thin that rain cannot form. Here, particles can drift and drift for years. Among these particles were tiny droplets of sulfur dioxide, so small they could stay suspended almost indefinitely. They spread outward from the eruption site like ripples on a pond, carried by high-altitude winds until they formed a delicate but global haze. To the human eye, this veil was almost invisible, but its effect was not. The veil did what it was destined to do. It scattered sunlight back into space. It didn't block all the light, but enough to matter. Days began to feel subtly different. In some places, the sky had a milky quality, like sunlight strained through thin cloth. In others, shadows seemed softer, less defined. Travelers wrote of afternoons that looked like perpetual early morning. And as sunlight weakened, so too did the warmth it carried. At first, no one noticed the shift. A single degree cooler on a summer's day can feel like nothing at all. But spread across months and continents, it became the seed of disaster. If there was one change people did notice, it was the sunsets. In Calcutta, British traders described the evening sky burning crimson, as if lit from beneath by some great furnace. In China, poets wrote verses about copper suns sinking into red seas. Even in London, the sunsets glowed with deep purples and fiery orange, so intense that some suspected the industrial smoke from cities had reached new heights of pollution. What they were actually seeing was the volcanic haze scattering shorter wavelengths of light, filtering blues and greens, leaving behind those rich, strange reds. Some found it beautiful, others found it ominous. Without a scientific understanding of high-altitude aerosols, people reached for the explanations they knew. Sailors blamed the red skies on distant fires burning across unseen continents. Farmers wondered if a great comet had passed too close to Earth. Clergymen used the phenomenon as a warning in their sermons, signs that God's patience was wearing thin. Newspapers printed letters from readers describing odd weather patterns, shorter growing seasons, and strange animal behavior. Cattle wandered aimlessly. Migratory birds changed their routes. Fishermen in the Baltic reported fewer fish, as if the seas themselves had grown unsettled. The truth was far larger than anyone imagined. Above their heads, an invisible shroud was tightening around the earth, one that would trap the coming years in a state of dim light and chilling cold. By late 1815, reports began trickling in of poor harvests in Southeast Asia and southern China. In Java, rice paddies yielded less than half their usual bounty. In the Philippines, mango trees flowered late and dropped their fruit too soon. In India, the summer monsoon weakened unexpectedly, leaving parts of the subcontinent parched and others drowning in poorly timed floods. Farmers shook their heads at the sky. The seasons have lost their way, they said. But still, no one connected the dots. The famine that had begun in scattered villages was about to spread far beyond Asia's shores. The true disaster, the one the history books would remember, had not yet arrived. The spring of 1816 in New England began like any other. Farmers tilled their fields, the air smelling of fresh-turned soil. Seeds of corn, wheat, and barley were pressed into the earth with the quiet confidence that comes from generations of routine. Children chased each other between budding apple trees. Women laid out laundry to dry in the gentle May sun. The rhythm of life rolled forward, planting, tending, waiting for summer. But summer never came. On the morning of June 6, 1816, the people of Massachusetts awoke to a sound they did not expect, the crisp hiss of falling snow. John Hayward, a farmer in Worcester County, wrote in his diary, "A white blanket covers the fields where young corn should be. The stalks are bowed and blackened, as if some night spirit came to kill them." Snow fell not in flurries, but in steady sheets, piling inches deep in some places. Across New Hampshire and Maine, families stepped outside in disbelief, holding their hands out to catch the flakes that should have been falling 6 months earlier. Cattle stood shivering in pastures. Sheep huddled together, their breath clouding in the frigid air. By the next morning, the frost had claimed the fields. Corn leaves curled into brittle ribbons. Bean plants crumpled into the soil. July brought no relief. Instead of warm mornings, heavy with the scent of clover, farmers woke to frost clinging to every blade of grass. Ice skimmed the surface of ponds before dawn. On July 9th, Sarah Hardy of Vermont wrote to her sister, "The ground crunches underfoot as if winter has returned. We light the fire every morning now, else the children's fingers turn stiff. I have never seen such a thing in my lifetime, nor has Father, who remembers the great snows of '89. In the evenings, families gathered around their hearths, in the middle of what should have been the hottest days of the year, feeding the fire with wood they had meant to save for winter." By August, hope for the year's harvest had faded. Then, as if to seal the fate of the season, another frost descended. On August 21st, ice again coated the fields. What little had survived the June and July freezes was destroyed overnight. Pumpkins, squash, beans, all blackened and collapsed. Even hardy rye and oats wilted. Farms that had once produced bushels now yielded almost nothing. Those who had stored food from the previous year were luckier, but only just. For many, there would be no feed for livestock when the true winter arrived. Men made the grim decision to slaughter cattle early rather than watch them starve. Salting barrels filled with meat, but it was not enough. In small towns, barter replaced coin. A sack of potatoes could fetch a set of tools. A bushel of grain might be traded for a winter coat. Church sermons took on a darker tone. Ministers warned of divine punishment, urging repentance. In taverns, whispers spread about strange signs, blood-red sunsets, birds migrating too soon, frost forming in the middle of a sunny day. Even those who were not deeply religious began to feel the unease. Something was wrong with the very fabric of the seasons. Vermont was hit especially hard. Fields that had once fed entire towns lay barren. and families faced the prospect of another year without a reliable crop. Many decided they could not endure another season like this. They sold their land, often for far less than it was worth, and joined the growing wagon trains heading westward into Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. The journey was risky. Roads were muddy and treacherous, and food scarce. But the promise of fertile land and a normal climate was enough to pull thousands from the only homes they'd ever known. One Vermont family, the Browns, recorded their decision in a letter to relatives. "We are bound for Ohio. Better to risk the wilderness than to starve in our own home." Newspapers began to refer to 1816 as the year without a summer. Others called it 1800 and froze to death. But names could not capture the cold in the marrow, the smell of ruined crops, the look of fear in the mother's eyes as she measured out the last of the flour. What no one in North America knew was that across the ocean, Europe was facing its own catastrophe, and in many ways, theirs was even worse. And that's where we'll pause our story. 1816 had earned its grim names in North America, but across the ocean, Europe was about to face a catastrophe even greater. Thank you for watching History Lore. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2. The story of the year without a summer has only just begun.